We have two speakers tonight, Gavin Towers, who is a member of the Fuelers Livery Company, so is a good livery constituent to our talk tonight. And he, with Tyler Manchester, his colleague, are going to be talking about responsible offsetting. Just a quick word about CF Partners. They're a leading provider of environmental and energy solutions to industrial and commercial clients. They've both got many years in this topic and this area of work. We've got some fabulous slides, and we've got Gavin and Tyler. Over to you.
I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of the solutions in the voluntary carbon market today. What is the voluntary carbon market? So Gavin works for Brook Supply, and I work for CF Partners, together under the same umbrella. And what we do is we look very much on kind of how we can provide sustainable solutions within this space. I focus on the voluntary carbon markets, which indirectly enable companies to invest in carbon reduction or carbon removal technologies, and as such help companies that are or kind of private entities as well, not able to do these through their own supply chains or their own operations directly, to increase their sustainability ambitions and reduce their carbon footprint and potentially become net zero. So the voluntary carbon market, in essence, it allows entities that have carbon footprints but are not able to reduce them through their own supply chains. We pictured an aircraft here because it's a very good example of an industry that is looking to become more sustainable, as they have a very kind of public-facing nature and are very dependent on consumer pressure, but don't have the ability to operate in any other way yet. So there's no sustainable aviation fuel, no sufficient sustainable aviation fuel. There's not no electric flying yet for the foreseeable future, but still they want to be able to do their business. So this is a good example of where organizations can claim emission reductions by investing in sustainable projects. And as such, even though they're not able to become more sustainable through their own operations, are able to do so through an investment in a carbon project. So that's, in essence, in very simple terms, how the voluntary carbon market works. Currently, there's 127 countries that have carbon projects. So the carbon markets by nature originally kind of came into existence by looking at the carbon markets, obviously, but we look at all different kind of greenhouse gases. So everything is converted back to 1 ton of CO2 equivalent, but that could be, for example, a methane project. So methane has a 80 times stronger greenhouse gas potential than carbon, and therefore, if you reduce 1 ton of methane, it would be the equivalent of 80 tons of carbon, and therefore the market kind of recognized everything calculated back to 1 ton of CO2 equivalent. There's different actors that are involved in the space. The main ones are the project developers, so those undertaking the projects on the ground, so either planting trees, implementing renewable energy projects, or a whole range of activities that we'll dive into slightly later. Then there's verification and standard bodies, so the entities that assess if everything in a project has gone according to a design that has been set out initially, and then we'll, over the years, come back and assess whether the project is still doing everything according to the initial plan. Then there's the investors or kind of intermediaries that are active in the space, traders, brokers, entities that are kind of more approaching this as a financial opportunity and are investing in these projects and then selling these credits on to other entities in this market. Now, there's a lot of policy initiatives, and it could be, for example, a real estate initiative, it could be an aviation initiative, an airport initiative, a shipping initiative. So what we see is that whilst government action is not as fast as needed for the current climate crisis, a lot of industries are coming forward with different policy initiatives. And as such, these are recognized as a different kind of actor within the market. And then finally, there's the end consumer of the carbon credit. So we talked about airlines for a second. When you buy a ticket, sometimes you have the ability to fly carbon neutral. Well, there you are a consumer of a carbon credit if you choose to fly carbon neutral by indirectly investing into a carbon project. So how does this carbon project kind of supply chain look? This is a very simple scheme of how this process usually goes. So a project developer will have an idea. they will commence kind of, usually these are NGOs or kind of charitable entities, but increasingly this market is kind of commoditizing. But the first concept comes with an idea for developing a project. So these could be a whole range of, I think there's across the different standards, there's over 100 different types of projects that you can undertake that reduce or remove carbon from the atmosphere. This project will be registered by a standard, so everything has to go according to kind of pre-agreed methodologies. If everything has been done according to plan, a credit's been issued. These credits can be bought, and then finally these can be retired by entities active in the market, which means this credit is taken out of circulation, and then the entity can calculate how much kind of carbon they use on an annual basis, and then offset the remainder of their kind of carbon emissions using carbon credits. Again, this is a very simple scheme, so surely there's kind of more nuance to this market. So what does a project look like? So a project has to be a quantifiable reduction. So you need to be able to calculate how much carbon is removed or avoided due to the project. And saying carbon again, but it could be multiple different kind of greenhouse gases. Each and every ton is quantified, listed on a registry. The main registries that are maintained are, for example, Gold Standard or Vera, or kind of there's more and newer and upcoming registries like the Biocarbon Registry. And you have to live up to kind of strict criteria. And what makes these projects kind of necessary is that, as you will surely recognize by the changes in our environment on a daily basis, the climate crisis requires immediate solutions. And what the voluntary carbon market does is it provides an infrastructure that enables direct investment in the environment, so in nature or kind of carbon removing technologies that otherwise would have not taken place. So one of the key criteria, and we'll get to that in a bit more detail in a second, is the additionality. So the revenue that's generated from the sale of 1 ton of carbon from a project has to be a game changer for that project. So the project would not have been able to be implemented if that additional revenue stream would have not been there. So currently there's a strong recognition that additional finance is required in order to achieve our climate targets. But if we look at the carbon abatement that is needed, and by the amount of carbon that's currently being offset by the voluntary carbon market, and kind of the availability of carbon credits currently in the market, it's simply dwarfed by the requirement. And therefore, obviously, the voluntary carbon market is not the only solution, but it is proposed as a short-term kind of immediate solution to the climate crisis, because these technologies and methodologies are available as they are. So where we see it is we are successful in the voluntary carbon market if we can drive ourselves into inexistence. So it's a temporary solution until we have all those sustainable solutions. Referring to electric flying and sustainable aviation fuel, for example. Once there's sufficient sustainable aviation fuel and electric flying is completely available, and we can think of examples within every industry. Once all of that is in place, there should be no more need for this indirect kind of financing of carbon removal and reduction, because everything will be net zero. But until then, there's increasing kind of recognition and usage of the voluntary carbon market as a tool in order to achieve sustainability ambitions. Now, there's names across a lot of different kind of industries that are using these in order to achieve their sustainability ambitions. Now, within tech, or within each and every industry, there's the preference to use something that is alongside the industry. So for tech, you see them moving more and more kind of into tech kind of removals, but these are a long way from kind of reaching maturity. So across the different industries, we see the use of different type of credits and regional preferences. Currently, there's around 7,070 entities that have made public climate commitments, and these commitments together, or so that the scope 1 and 2 emissions represent around 9.3 gigatons of CO2 equivalent, and then scope 3 around 45 or 46 gigatons CO2 equivalent. So we see increasing number of public kind of statements on kind of climate ambitions and the use of carbon credits across these entities, but there's many more entities that are using these in order to achieve kind of their final step in sustainability. Now, it's a very kind of natural segue into how can you use these carbon credits. So in the old world, and kind of in the old ideal picture, it was encouraged to first kind of avoid the emissions that you could avoid, then those that you still need to emit, you need to reduce, and there where you can find alternative means, replace those, and then finally offset the remaining emissions. Now, what we've noticed is that this is in many cases is kind of leading to a bit of a lagging carbon strategy. So where people are saying, no, first we need to stop doing this, we notice that the kind of the avoidance of people traveling, for example, or people purchasing carbon intense products has not really reduced. And therefore, what we're noticing now that much more effective strategies than whilst you're implementing your carbon abatement and your carbon reduction strategies, invest in the immediate term in kind of the available and prevalent solutions that are around, whilst you start thinking about and implementing your carbon kind of net zero strategy. So how can we get on that net zero journey without too much delay? I think everyone could agree that there's immediate action required. And yeah, what we're saying is rather it could be your first and last step in this journey. So whilst you start implementing your strategies, look at those available technologies that are already kind of there that help you reduce and kind of remove carbon from the atmosphere, whilst you're looking at what you can do to avoid, reduce, and replace your activities. So it fits into a broader net zero strategy. The carbon credits can feature alongside kind of green gas with the use of RGGOs, renewable energy certificates. These are all things that can lead to an immediate impact. So the certificates are in place in order to kind of indirectly finance projects that are already available. In the medium-term strategy, you can kind of see how you can get involved with renewable PPAs and energy efficiency implementations, increasingly moving to kind of more the project investments, so the lasting impact, investing in longer-term solutions that might not be made available immediately for the industry that you're in, but certainly will whilst we start maturing kind of and progressing through the sustainability journey, will be increasingly available. So the financing of energy efficiency and renewable PPAs, but also carbon credits, also leads to the support of potentially kind of newer non-prevalent technologies that were not kind of economically viable on a standalone basis, and therefore require the additional revenue stream generated from the sale of these certificates or credits. Now, how do you use these credits in a responsible way? So certainly over the past year, voluntary carbon markets have gone from the background to the foreground in sustainability debate. And I think it's crucial to highlight that there's, whilst this market is not perfect, and I think we recognize there's a lot of things that need to be resolved in the market. It's something that is at least addressing it to some extent. And sometimes, the perfect is the enemy of the good. And in this case, I think it's very important for us to start recognizing that there are issues within the market, and those could surround to some extent kind of credibility. There's a lot of uncertainty, I think, in the macroeconomic space currently that is leading to a lot of delay in investments decisions in sustainability. But these issues are increasingly being addressed by sustainability, kind of by policy initiatives, as mentioned before, that are driving transparency and credibility within the market. How can we operate responsibly? How can we address all those concerns within the market and make sure that everything is done to kind of high standard, using high quality, and looking only at those standards that distinguish themselves for being a driver of kind of quality and transparency in the market. So it means that the use of carbon credits has to be part of a broader sustainability strategy. You cannot just throw carbon credits at your residual emissions and then think you're done for the foreseeable future. Particularly because we see that the carbon stock within a company is increasingly becoming a liability, as both from a consumer-facing perspective, there's increasing pressure on corporates to adopt a sustainability strategy, but also on a national level, we're seeing increasing noise from or kind of mention from emission trading schemes and carbon taxing schemes that they're going to address the use of carbon as a commodity, or kind of the exploitation and the not paying for carbon credit is going to be increasingly impossible for entities, and therefore having carbon emissions becomes a liability, and implementing a strategy that addresses your carbon should increasingly be recognized as a prudent approach. Now, first movers, so offsetting is a tool that is part of this picture in a sustainability, is in a sustainable future. So how kind of you incorporate the use of these in your sustainability journey? And again, it's part of the solution, not the full solution. Then I think increasingly a number of entities are using voluntary carbon credits in their sustainability strategy, but you have to be very effective in communicating how these are being used and what other means are being done to address sustainability. The quality in the voluntary carbon market. So one of the things that we mentioned is additionality. So there's financial additionality and there's regulatory additionality. And the additionality concept comes from, we want to make sure that a project in itself shouldn't have been in place without the financing through the voluntary carbon market. So this means that a tree planting project in Latin America would have not taken place were it not for the finance that has been generated through the sale of voluntary carbon credits. So these are purely kind of additional projects that otherwise would have not been there. And the same applies kind of for regulatory additionality. There should be no regulation around the need for that project to be there. And the project would have therefore not been there were it not through the kind of indirect investment that we're generating through the sale of the carbon credits. Now, there's different aspects that define quality. So how recent was this this project undertaken? What kind of project is it? Is it a large-scale hydro dam in China? Or is it a very small kind of land-owned project in working together kind of with indigenous populations in Latin America? Or are you looking at some kind of new carbon removal technology? So these are different project types and implementations that need to be taken into consideration. Removing carbon from the atmosphere is typically considered to be higher quality than just avoiding credits from being emitted. So there's co-benefits. So what sustainable attributes are you addressing with your carbon project besides the reduction or the removal of carbon itself? Where is the debate? So what is the public perception of the type of project that you're using or investing in? And also increasingly third-party quality assessment. So satellite data verification if trees have actually been planted in a project that is stating that it's planting trees. Are cook stoves actually deployed in an area in rural sub-Saharan Africa where the idea was to distribute cook stoves and prevent kind of local trees from being cut down? So these are all increasing kind of aspects that enhance the quality within the market. And are certainly required as well to drive this credibility within the market, and therefore making sure that the use of a voluntary carbon market is respected and recognized in your sustainability strategy and not as easily contested. So what we're showing here is just a few things that we do in-house, for example, to assess whether a project is actually doing what it's stating that it is doing. And this is just an example of what we do, but most entities in the market will have similar comparable kind of processes in place to assess whether kind of what the different risks are from undertaking a project. So looking at how long the project will be around, which area it operates in, what the additionality score is, but also looking at environmental and social impacts, whether there's integrity in the standard, what regulatory risks are we seeing developing. So is the government saying that they're going to address carbon emissions in country or not? Are they going to say that they can use these credits internationally or not? Then we make a quality assessment of the project and help to address the different risks and vulnerabilities that we see within the project. And then finally, we make a satellite assessment of where the project is supposed to be undertaken, which enables us to look at this is an example of a project, and this was a very fancy slide showing a slider going from right to left. You can see some degraded areas here in the project area. So this is a drawing on the map. and we use satellite data to verify that in this instances, the degraded areas, so the brownish areas on the map, are actually being reforested. So this project was in a working slide a very good example of over the last 5 years where trees have been planted in the area and then the area becomes reforested. So increasingly we're using these means that are that rely on kind of open source, free to use information, and in order to assess whether a project that we're investing in are actually doing what they're stating that they're doing. Yeah, so we mentioned quickly the policy initiatives in the market. So the increasing number of policy initiatives that are driving quality and are proposing kind of for different industries the ability to assess how they operate, and according to kind of the guidelines that are set out by these initiatives, whether you can align your operations with these initiatives or not. Now, the bucket analogy. So where the carbon market comes into this is that we very much recognize kind of that our carbon stock. So if we look at our atmosphere is heavily kind of filling up with carbon. So the bucket's about to overflow, and the tap is the carbon from the different industries just keeps on pouring kind of carbon into the atmosphere. And what we're saying really is that we should have the ability to remove, but also reduce the amount of carbon that's coming into the atmosphere. So we need to close the tap, but we also need to start emptying the bucket. And that is something that we really that we can really do by employing the means of the voluntary carbon market. So there's carbon removal and reduction technologies that are currently in need of financing. So we need to be able to finance these projects and therefore close the tap and start removing water from the bucket, so to say. So both of these are required to mitigate the ongoing climate crisis. I'm going to slowly move. So we addressed additionality already. So there's good practice, bad or not so good practice within the carbon market, and I think it's very good for us to recognize this. So the use of high quality credits, being able to give full transparency in your offsetting history and why you are claiming to be net zero, for example, and how you've achieved that is ever important, because there will be more and more entities looking into this and looking to use this, but also therefore we need to have a shared understanding of how this is supposed to work and be able to provide kind of full insight into that. So there's the SEC ruling that that is now looking to be replicated on an international level, mandating kind of full transparency in carbon emissions, but also the use of and kind of the increasing scrutiny on a national and international level on the use of voluntary carbon credits or credits in general is therefore leading us to need to be fully transparent within the market. So accurate assessments of carbon footprints within your operations are some instances very hard to achieve, and with who this responsibility is sometimes contested, and therefore kind of a clear and accurate way of assessing these is very good and ever important in a good practice approach. So the not so good practice, obviously, the use of cheaper non additional low quality credits, and not providing transparency in what kind of claims you're making, no details on your sustainability journey, what else you're looking to do, and completely underestimating your carbon footprint and overestimating the value of your credits. So what does this look like in practice? And given that we're a relatively UK focused forum today, we wanted to give a quick example through the UK voluntary carbon market. So there are standards in the UK that look at implementing kind of forestry projects, so the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code, looking at peatland projects. And without going into too much detail, what these do is they enable you to invest in nature projects, and then further down the line be able to claim kind of the carbon reductions that can be calculated to have been derived from your investment in order to offset those emissions in your value chain that you're not able to offset yourself directly. So we're highlighting this example here because of the relevance to this forum. We must note though that the voluntary carbon market in the UK simply because of land cost and availability of projects are relatively scarce and therefore more expensive. Very high quality projects, but hard to get a hold of. And simply due to the nature of these projects, it will take a long time for the credits to be generated and to be able to be used in your sustainability strategy. Now, the international carbon markets are an effective mean to, and for some reason my slide is not completely loaded, and apologies for that. So the international carbon markets are implemented to facilitate finance into projects, but also into areas where it is cheaper to implement and therefore more effective to implement these type of projects. And given that carbon, but greenhouse gases in general are a global issue. So if we emit carbon in London, within several weeks, the molecules of carbon could be anywhere in the atmosphere. And therefore, in theory, it doesn't matter too much whether we're implementing projects in sub-Saharan Africa, in Indonesia, in Australia, or in Latin America. Carbon reduction needs to happen on a global scale. And therefore, starting off by investing in projects that are in areas where it's simply cheaper to reduce or remove carbon is, from a financial perspective, more effective, and you'll get more bang for your buck by implementing projects in these areas. Not only that, we're also able to drive sustainable developments and kind of reforestation in those areas where it's needed mostly. The participation of the voluntary carbon market is increasing. We're seeing an increasing recognition on a national and international level. We see examples of governments agreeing bilaterally to collaborate. Switzerland and Ghana for being a recent example where carbon reductions in Ghana are more effective to implement, and Switzerland will be able to use some of those carbon reductions that they help finance to reduce their national carbon stocks and be able to improve their position against their nationally determined contribution. So voluntary carbon markets, currently mainly employed by kind of private entities, increasingly will be incorporated on a governmental level.
We're going to start from is really basically it started the energy journey. This is the electricity side of things, which comes in as scope 2. This is my view of where the green journey is at on a scope 2 electricity. You're starting mainly off with a commodity that's bought with no certificates at all, and that's very much on a brown side. Moving towards a blue, which tends to be what they call a nuclear and can be carbon neutral. There's debates on that one as well. And most of the energy that's supplied in the UK market is a commodity bought with REGOs from the supplier's general fuel mix, and that's renewable energy guarantees of origin. And they are basically can be any fuel mix. If you go onto any supplier site, you'll see what their fuel mix is on their thing. And then you get a PPA, which is a commodity that's bought with suppliers' general PPA with project REGOs. So you can actually specify which project that you want from the supplier that can match your PPA and also the price. A corporate PPA is when you're entering into something a bit more long term, and you can purchase your electricity from a specific project along with the REGOs attached to that project. And we can go from there. And then the other one is the final energy project, which is you're investing basically in your own renewable energy project, which is on or off site, which is very much a long-term investment. The gas is a bit shorter because of basically the availability of RGGOs. So there's not many RGGOs around. There's not that many gas projects around. So a lot of gas is bought with no certificates at all. The RGGOs are bought to match the gas, which you can do so. And they are very expensive. They're sometimes 3-4 times the price of an REGO and can be very hefty. And then there's projects as well, but investing a renewable RGGO, is a renewable gas guarantees of origin. The other one's renewable electricity guarantees of origin. Those projects that you invest in on the gas side can be anaerobic digestion projects for a lot of companies have food projects or waste can invest in those. And the key thing about that is what companies do tend to do is carbon offset. And we can carbon offset that scope 3 as well as you can carbon offset that gas if you so choose to.